little picture I sent. This one fascinated me a little bit. I had
Really a phrase that came to my mind that ended up being how I ended up finding what I wanted to use as the visual for this morning, and not to do that just to be redundant and repetitive. But to me, a visual helps, something you can connect with as you talk about a topic. That kind of helps me as a person sometimes. But when I look at that picture, it fascinates me a little. And I look at that person who is standing there casting a shadow, and there's some things that I wondered about that. And Rhonda Ray was sitting back there, and she just kind of shared something with me. You care to share that, Rhonda Ray? Okay, because he views himself with such strength, that could give him the perception that he's ready to face life, isn't it? Because if you look, does the shadow match the person? They don't match. In a true scenario, we know that the shadow is nothing more than some form of us that is cast out because of light being shined on us. But that shadow quite possibly represents how he views himself. Now, you could go the other way. Maybe he views himself in humility. But when light shines on him, it ends up he's actually full of what? Strength. So you could go in either direction that you take this. But the thing that struck me when I looked at the picture is the shadow how he views himself? That was the question I asked. Because if you look, the arms crossed, that typically can mean a sign of determination or you're resolute. Arms aren't open, you know. So maybe the person has a perception that he brings strength to a situation. Maybe the person sees himself as someone others should model their behavior after. And that was the phrase that was stuck in my head. When you think about being a role model, you know, all of us are a role model of some sort to other people, whether we intend it or not, whether we even want it or not, right? People are looking and people watch. So maybe this person sees himself as somebody who should be viewed as a model, someone that others could model their behavior after. I mean, we have no idea. I mean, I didn't research the history or use of this image, but the image struck me because the person appears to be looking at the shadow, or this is what struck me. He's looking at a version of himself because apparently he sees the shadow, right? So if we took the opposite viewpoint of maybe he's very humble, but he sees him, but really there could be strength that he sees there. Typically we see our shadow when you're looking at it in that direction. So the way I took it is he's looking at a version of himself. So the question can become, is that version reality? Is that really what is portrayed? So the shadow is how the person maybe wants to be perceived. And I have a purpose with all this. Thanks for bearing with me. Maybe the shadow is the person's goal. Maybe when he looks at that and he sees strength and he sees that somewhat buff image, maybe that's a goal. Maybe he wants to be viewed as someone who's strong, dependable, reliable. Maybe in reality, this is what struck me though. And when I think about my duty as an individual before other people, maybe in reality, what if the man has none of those traits? Does the image of him standing there demonstrate he's that strong image? The person standing there is the actual human. We could say that, to me, that's the reality. The shadow might be what he hopes for, or might be what he perceives himself as, but is it reality? Maybe the man has none of the traits. There was a sister who I believe listens to the Sunday school. She's very sweet in her messages, through Messenger, very kind. And she put a phrase after some people like to receive the image, and so I sent it. And she sent this phrase, good imagination. And that struck me after I sent that image. She wrote that, good imagination. And I thought maybe the person's perception of himself, unfortunately, is imaginary, an unfortunate creation of his own imagination. That's what he wants, but is the reality matching it? In the image, it's not, is it? What we see standing there is not what he sees in the shadow. And I have no idea. This is open to interpretation how we could use it. But this I do know, that as someone who professes to be a believer, we all have a perception of ourselves. Is that true? We all have a perception of ourselves and how we want others to view us. I mean, I think if someone doesn't wake up with some reality of that, then it's a little scary. We need to have some perception and we need to have some desire of what we would like to portray to other people. We have goals, I hope. We have goals for how we wish to be perceived. You hopefully have goals for what you would like for your life to demonstrate and show other people. But on top of all those goals and those self-perceptions, what else exists? Reality. Does the reality match the perception? It doesn't always. What I want to be perceived, does that match the reality of what others do perceive? And we all have a reality of how we are actually viewed and understood by people around us. And that is something that I kind of feel like as an individual, it deserves my recognition and reflection. I may have a perception that I want to portray. I may have a perception of what I want to be viewed as. But what is reality? What good is that in that picture doing if he views himself with such strength, but that strength really isn't there? What will happen when he faces a difficult situation? Reality. The strength really wasn't there. In Titus 2:7, in all things showing thyself a pattern of good works, in doctrine showing uncorruptness, gravity. In this last word, sincerity. So I have the responsibility to have a pattern of good works showing, one of the words I'm picking out from the verse, sincerity. He may be sincere in his perception, but does that mean that's reality? Absolutely not. I could be just as sincere in my perception, my self-perception, or what I want others to view. I could be sincere in that, but I may actually be wrong. What is the pattern of my works demonstrating before other people? Because that will become their reality. It may not be what I want them to perceive, but whether or not that's irrelevant. It will become their sincere reality of me, the pattern of what I show before them and what my life demonstrates. Philippians 1:10, that ye may approve things that are excellent, that ye may be, and this word just kind of stood out of my head when I prepared, sincere. If that person in that image perceives himself incorrectly and he persists in that misperception, is that going to do him any good? It can severely limit what he can accomplish because he won't admit his self-perception doesn't match reality. He's being insincere. He's maybe sincere in his attempt, but it doesn't match. He can't live up to his self-perception because it's not reality. And I thought about these verses that encourage that ye may be sincere and without offense till the day of Christ. There are people, and it could be me. I'll put it on me first. I mean, when I reflect about these things, God help me. I try to think, how can this help me be cautious and careful in my own personal life? There are people who they mean well, but they are sincerely mistaken in their self-perceptions. And if you've ever encountered situations like that, like hearing an individual talk, and you almost feel like, do I know this person? Because the way they portray themselves and talk about themselves isn't anything like I perceive. And that's sad, isn't it? Because you're like, are we talking about the same individual? Because you're talking about yourself. And it doesn't match what I've perceived. Serving the Lord it is so much more than, and we know this, I'm not saying anything you don't know. It's a lot more than me just saying, I serve him. That can be my perception. What I want to portray. I'm portraying to people, I serve him. But do I live it? Is that what others perceive? Is that the reality that someone else picks up from me? And I'm putting it on me. Do they say, yes, I see he has the love of Christ in his life. And if I'm living it, it means that I should demonstrate, as I'm admonished in the text, a pattern of good works. And I think that phrase from the Bible is extremely important because other believers watch my life. And often when we talk about, well, you may be the only Bible some people read, I'm not devaluing the comment, nor am I trying to treat it like as a cliche. But it's a very common phrase because it's true. But other believers watch us too. It ain't just sinners. Other believers are watching. Because I thought of the phrase role model. A classroom teacher has a degree, has passed their certification, EdTPA, this new thing that's on my word. I'm glad it didn't exist when I came along. But they've done all their stuff. But what is the reality when they're in the classroom? Credentials mean nothing if you can't control a class. Do you think those kids care you have a diploma hanging on your wall? They don't give a rip. Some of them aren't too old enough to even know what it means. They don't care. What's going to matter is how you demonstrate your ability and your training. Other teachers watch that too. So what would I just use my job a lot as an analogy because it's what I can relate to. What is a young teacher? It's not just students who watch me. It's not just a student who may think I want to be a teacher one day. Other young teachers may watch me too. What does Mr. Eldreth do in his classroom? Why do I walk by and they're behaving? What is he doing? Because my room feels like a barrel of monkeys. What is he doing in the classroom? Well, there's a lot that goes with that. I'm older, I have experience, etc. But it's not just someone who's considering being a teacher who will watch my life. And that thought struck me when I did this lesson. It's often that we talk about that non-believers watch, or people who don't profess, or people who don't understand are watching, and that is all true. But I don't want to just focus on people who do not profess anything, though they certainly are watching our life. But before I can even begin thinking about whether or not my life is demonstrating a pattern of good works, for those who don't profess to love the Lord, maybe I could benefit from asking myself this: what do other believers see in me? What do other believers feel and perceive when they look at my life? Is it a reality that matches my self-perception? Or do I need to humble myself and say, okay, Lord, I don't quite have this together as I need to? Because if it's not going to be a good example from someone who already has knowledge, how can I expect myself to be a good example for people who don't? If in the classroom, how could I encourage someone, yeah, you need to be a teacher? If they come watch my classroom and think, oh my word, he can't even get two kids to sit beside each other. Are they going to walk away from that thinking they should take value in what I have to say? No. If a fellow teacher can't have faith in it, then it's quite possible a future one may not either. And I'm just using my job as an example. In 1 Timothy 4:12, let no man despise thy youth, but be thou an example of the believers in word and conversation, in charity and spirit and faith and purity. When I look at myself and I take that man in the image, that man in the picture, who appears to be seeing himself through a shadow that he casts, he's not seeing reality. The shadow doesn't match. The perception of himself does not match the reality that we can see of him standing there. They're not matching images. Do I really see myself as who I am? That's the question I asked myself when I did this. Do I see myself as others see me? You know, that's a good question. As an educator, one way you can benefit is, how do the students perceive me? What are their perceptions? Because they're kids, but they still have an understanding. And sometimes it's okay to discuss that. My mom and family who had, terrible sicknesses. What is the thing that stood out to me from the medical professionals who treated them, the ones who we valued and who were really good? They had compassion. The perception we had of them, the reality we had from experiencing them, was that they genuinely cared. My family were not treated as just another room they had to visit. Let's hurry and get this over with. That's not what you have when you're the person sitting on the other side of that news. You need to feel cared about. But a doctor may think they're great. They've published papers in the Harvard Medical Review, but not a single patient wants to visit them because their perception doesn't match reality. I know that humans will not always be fair in how they view us. We live in reality. But there can be a collective impression that is grounded in a level of truth based on experiences other people have had with me. The perception that is taken away of what I profess and what I say I perceive, and the reality that people experience is often gathered from a genuine experience that they've had with me. So I can have myself convinced that I'm living this experience with God that's spot on. But the question that I want to ask myself, what do the experiences other people have with me tell them about me? Because that's reality. My self-perception may not do any good other than making my own self-esteem feel great. But ain't nobody looking to me as an example or a role model because I have some serious issues I need to contend with. My self-perception may not match what someone views me as, the quote unquote, and I'm using this from scripture, the fruits of my life. That's what people will examine. That's what will give people their own perception of what my life is really like. Do I want to give the impression that I have it all together, but in reality, what can happen sometimes? I don't. It ain't together a bit more than nothing. Than those two Legos that lay on the floor, tempting your foot to step on them. It ain't together. I'm much better off if I can admit that I'm struggling. In my job, which teachers can you help most? Those who admit when there's a problem. Those who say, I'm learning, I'm new, I'm trying, I'm struggling. And parents can be awful. They will attack a young person. And that has created a fear that some younger professionals do not want to call parents. They are afraid that they will be blamed first before they can even explain what happened. And that's not all parents, for sure. When you call with some experience, and possibly when you taught them, that brings a different reality. That it just does. I have an unfair advantage. But when someone's struggling, and rather than act like it's all together, they have a beautiful bulletin board. It's gorgeous. It's Pinterest worthy. Their door is immaculate. It's wonderful. They have a beautiful reading section that they spent their own money to create, but they ain't a kid learning a thing. Image is great. Reality is something else. The image might look spot on, but the reality is things are not together and they won't admit it. You can't really help. But I can get help if I admit I need it. Or I can continue in a delusion that will cause me great spiritual trouble. And I thought about this because I try to be in my own thinking. And I'm thinking, if someone faces if it's me, if I face a struggle, the way I deal with that struggle becomes a reality other people perceive. The way I handle the struggle. And I may never, quote unquote, sin in a situation. I may never, quote unquote, wander from the Lord in that situation. But the question I ask myself, but will I grow? If I cannot admit that I need to be seriously self-reflecting on the image that my life is portraying to other individuals as I face this situation, or I face this trial, or I face this unfortunate situation thrust upon me, if I don't seriously self-reflect on what is the image my life portray to other individuals, and I mean believer and non-believer alike, my delusion could become a discouragement to a believer. Now wait, he says he's got this all together, but it seems like he's just really struggling and not admitting that he didn't handle this situation well. Now, what kind of example and role model am I being to someone who wants to do what's right? I'm not. I could cause them confusion. Could I cause others to think? And it sounds kind of harsh to say this, but I'm just being honest because I live in reality like the rest of you. But what if someone said this about me? I need to self-reflect. Could I cause someone else to think, I don't want to do anything. I don't want anything to do with Danny and what he believes. He wants to act like he's got it all together, but that man absolutely couldn't make two right choices in a row. Because if I'm living that way, I may want it to be perceived that I got it all together. The Pinterest-worthy bulletin board, the beautiful classroom door, the desks are immaculate and clean. It even smells nice. But they can't control children, and there is absolutely no learning. The fundamental thing that matters most isn't happening. But boy, there's a pretty image. I can't just serve an image. I have to serve reality. What are people seeing? I know there'll always be critics of how we live our lives. We ain't going to escape that. That's just reality, isn't it? But there are perceptions that people form because they have watched my life. And they are basing what they think of me off of what they see. So what are people seeing is the question I owe them to self-reflect on. What are their experiences telling them? I owe someone else the honesty of that answer to myself. And I don't want to just think about non-believers when I say that. That was kind of something that really struck me when I prepared this. Am I giving someone who is walking with the Lord something worth watching? If I'm not, and I'm not willing to admit it, then my perception and realities don't match. And how's the Lord going to bless it? Something worth emulating. Is that what I can offer? And I'm not saying that you do it to promote yourself. We know that's wrong. That's not even what I'm talking about. But to live in such a way that even a fellow believer could say, I can tell that he has human struggles just like the rest of us. But I can see that he wants to make choices that God will honor and that will help him through the struggles. Because there's all kinds of things that can get in the way when we face these situations. A lot of stuff. And I'll talk to them. Sometimes we watch people, whether it be making a choice, going through life, facing hardships and decisions, or even good times. Or we hear comments they make that, in our opinion, you can recognize as an observer, they've only made their struggle worse. Their self-perception is so strong that the way they're doing it's right, that they cannot see reality. And they pile trouble upon trouble upon trouble because they can't watch their mouth. They can't learn that the way they speak to someone isn't helping it. They can't learn that the choices they're making are not helping and that they're not owning the consequences that come from them. And all they do is make the life more chaotic. So here's the thing. Do these same people look at themselves like the man in the image? They see themselves strong and bold, but in reality, they are on the struggle bus in need of godly intervention themselves. And there's nothing wrong with needing intervention. There's nothing wrong with needing help. I cannot live my life based on an image that I want to portray. I have to be honest with myself and ask the Lord, what image am I actually portraying before other people? Is my life providing an example that someone else could look to? Not that they can glorify and brag on me as an individual. That is not my goal. But they can say, in fairness, I can see that he wants to make decisions and choices that please God. That's fair, isn't it? I can see that when he's struggling, he owns it. Is that fair? But we live in a society that doesn't want to. Everything is everyone's life is a consequence of someone else's choice. Other choices do impact us. But everything is truly everyone else's fault. Is that really reality? If that's what I'm saying, but if that's what my perception is, others are seeing me as an excuse. And they don't want nothing to do with that. They're not going to come to me. They don't want anything to do with that. Can they say, I can see that when he's struggling, he owns it and truly tries to work through the struggle. And life will present you some hard things you don't anticipate. I've lived long enough to recognize that. Can they say, I can see that he's not interested in portraying the image of a victim, blaming other people for his woes. Instead, they see that he can hold himself accountable. I'm saying if it were me, that I'll hold myself accountable for my choices and my actions. If that be the case, that takes a maturity that God has to help me maintain. But if I see myself as bold and strong, and then all I ever do, I couldn't help it because, or it's because someone this, or I felt this because of so-and-so, why is someone going to want to emulate that and look at me? They're going to view me as having a very severe disconnect between my reality and my self-perception. In John chapter 13, when Jesus was speaking to the disciples, they were doing a foot washing, as we say around here. They were doing a foot washing. He said to them in verse 15, for I have given you an example that ye should do as I have done to you. His actions in that set of scriptures provided an example for his believers to follow. That's what Jesus came to do, right? Well, here's the question I'll ask Danny. Do my actions provide an example for others to follow? Is that fair? That's what I better reflect on. And why is it so important that I ask myself that question? Think about that. Why is it so important that I ask myself that question? Do my actions provide an example for others to follow? And this was one reason that came to me. Well, I think that it very much matters. If someone looks at my life, the person may be able to say and understand, okay, they're a Christian. They may recognize that I'm not having anything to do with things that are sinful or wrong or anything of that nature. But people will not just look at traits as reasons to feel my life is an example to offer them. Because they can look to a lot of people and feel like they're living a good life, can't they? It doesn't have to be me. It's not just traits that they'll look at. A person will not just accept words from my mouth. Well, I believe this, and so should you. If they look at me and think, I cannot see that Danny is as strong as he wants to say he is. If my reality and their perceptions have a disconnect, and I'm not being honest in recognizing it, then I can't expect them to look at me as an example. I can't expect them to say, he offers us something worth emulating. But you're not sinning. You're not out cursing. You're not doing drugs. It doesn't matter. That's not just the things people look at. Most people we interact with probably don't want to go home and get high on meth. I mean, duh. I mean, most of them aren't looking for just that. They're looking at us as a whole person. And that weighs on me if I think about it. No, I don't sit around thinking about it. Oh, the burden. No, it's not like that. Maybe I should say, maybe I'm thinking of this because it should weigh on me more. I haven't been sitting around thinking about that. What if they could say, I can see that Danny's actions, words, and choices, they're not really helping his life. I see Danny as adding to his stress by the choices he's making, and I don't see him learning from those choices. Is that going to provide an example of strength before even another believer? No. Now, I'm as fair as you can get. I try to be. We all face hardships. We all face struggles. We don't know what could happen today. But how we handle that will be an example, not just to non-believers, but maybe a believer who may end up struggling later themselves. I may want to portray an image of great strength and great power, but if someone can look at my life and they only see great concern, then I really need to get myself straightened out. And this I'm putting on Danny before I feel like someone can look to me as an example. I've got to work on myself. You can walk by someone's classroom and love their Pinterest-worthy board, or whatever they say now, Instagram-worthy, I guess. You can do all that, and you might learn some good ideas. But what is going to fundamentally matter most is, do children learn? And if they're not, that teacher needs to get things straightened out first. The other stuff will come in place, and it's okay that that's their talent. But the other thing needs to be the focus, not just the image they think they're portraying. Can I say with sincerity to someone else, like Philippians 4:9, those things which ye have both learned and received and heard and seen in me, do. Would I want someone to say that? Would I want them to? If that gives me pause, it probably means I have a level of humility and understanding that I want to make sure I'm in check first. And the God of peace shall be with you. Is my walk with the Lord worth, again, emulating? And a person could say, well, I know more truth than so-and-so. They got to listen to me. And that reminds me of the picture. We have a self-perception of great importance. We have a self-perception of great strength of knowledge. But that is naively negating the experiences that someone could have had with me. I could think I'm projecting this, say I'm projecting that, rest on my laurels, as they say, of knowledge and understanding and past history. But what does someone's experience say? If someone can think, and I thought about this because I live in a reality just like you do. What if someone could say, Danny has been nothing but difficult to deal with. Now, he doesn't curse. He ain't going to yell at you. He doesn't do anything wrong in those regards, but he's an absolute stress to deal with. What if someone could say that about me? But I'm strong. I know truth. Do they care now? My perception and my reality have a serious disconnect. And I need to straighten that out first. If there's nothing wrong with humbling oneself, I find. Listen, I know I got my faults. I don't even think listen, I did an email just the other day. I forgot about something we had planned. I would remember it and then I'd forget. I'd remember, then I'd forget. And it's kind of a big deal. I've been in favor of it for the kids. It's a wonderful, rewarding thing to do. but I haven't done nothing to help the person. And I forgot. And it hit me. You idiot. You've done nothing. So I emailed them and I said, I have done nothing. I owe you an apology. And if my kids can't participate, that is my fault. And I own that. You think I'm going to be mad at them if my kids couldn't participate? Who do I need to be mad at? Me. It's my fault. And I emailed an apology. Well, guess what they emailed back? Oh, I thought everybody's doing it. It's fine. And I've got it worked out. I'm staying Tuesday evening to help. I need to do my part. You know, if something like I had just used as an example could be said about me, then all these things that I could proclaim and all the power I want to say my life has, whether spiritually or morally or otherwise, it is a reality how that can get negated because someone has gotten to the point they don't care to hear about a thing I have to say because my way I portray myself has not created a connection. There's a disconnect between how I view myself and the reality that others experience. And, you know, someone could say, well, why? Why can't they at least listen to things you know? Because my life is not giving off the perception I think it's giving off. It feels contrary to the scripture. It feels insincere to them. I'm giving off the perception that I am a difficult individual to deal with. So why would somebody want to view me as a person to emulate, let's say spiritually or whatever the case is? And that is not always fair, but life ain't fair, honey. What people perceive will determine what people feel, period. That's just life. Doesn't matter how much I view myself, just like that character in the image a certain way, if others don't perceive it. I got to be honest with who first? Me. That's why I sent that email. I was like, oh man, that slipped my mind. I felt like a goober. So, am I demonstrating a pattern of good works? In 1 Peter 2:21, for even hereunto were ye called, because Christ also suffered, leaving us an example, that ye should follow his steps. Christ gave us an example worth following. We recognize that, right? And that's why we're here, right? But did people still doubt him? Of course. There were people who doubted his sincerity. They doubted whether or not he was truly the Son of God. Maybe someone who was Jewish viewed him as a prophet, but not the Messiah. They had doubt in their heart because that's just humanity, no matter how good you are. There will always be people who can doubt. And even if you're living as sincere as possible and muster and manage, there will be people who unfortunately can find something. But when I give people reasons to have the concern about me, that to me is a whole different matter. I gave my coworker a reason to think, he ain't doing nothing to help me, and this is a lot of work. I created that. I needed to address it. Jesus worked miracles, and he performed acts that were proof he was who he said he was. Do the fruits of my life do the same for me? I might boldly proclaim, well, I'm not sinning, so I'm fine. Well, that's a wonderful place for me to be, isn't it? And that's where God wants me to be, isn't it? But if someone can look at my life and see other concerns, oh, Lord, there's Danny. You can't tell him nothing. Oh, don't worry. He's got that critical way. He's always making excuses for himself or somebody else. Yeah, he ain't going to follow through. You know, then why would someone else want to look at me as an example to follow? Is that fair to put on myself? Why would they look at me as an example? Honey, they ain't going to look at me as an example to follow. They ain't going to seek it because they don't feel like they're going to find it. Okay? So why do I get upset if someone treats me like what my life offers isn't for them? Because it's just my fault. Except I've gotten trapped. I have a perception that's not matching reality. It's quite possible that I'm the one mostly to blame for their negative feelings. In 1 John 2:6, he that saith he abideth in him ought himself also so to walk, even as he walked. You know, Jesus' life, though, he did endure terrible hardships. What did it prove? That he was an example worth following. And this touches my heart. It proved that he loved when others wouldn't. He forgave when others wanted to judge, stone, and kill. He was honest, even if it might hurt to hear it. But he said what he said out of love for the individual. You can tell when there's love behind what someone says. Sometimes people can say things and it cuts you so deeply and you don't feel any love. Maybe they don't think of it that way. They think they're helping, but why is there no love there? There's a disconnect. They have a perception of what they're saying and how it's viewed and how strong they are and how it's going to come across. It doesn't match the reality the other person feels. There's a disconnect. So it's not going to produce that fruit that the person possibly would want. Even Jesus faced critics who had no desire to emulate his beliefs and knowledge, but they were at fault for their own feelings, not him. What is the reality of what I'm portraying to others? Does my self-perception match my reality? And I wanted to end with an example. So we all have people in our lives that we share many commonalities with. Some of us have hobbies in common, whatever. But I was thinking, a relatively new commonality that I share with a lot of people now is marriage. I didn't share in that for most of my adult life. But I'm still learning. I haven't been married 3 years and have it all figured out. That's funny. I'm still learning. I learn every day. Okay, probably. I don't necessarily sit around and think about that per se. But, I just want people to look at Rhonda Ray and me, not to glorify us. But when I prayed for a spouse, this is what I didn't pray for someone who's 5'3". 5'3". I didn't pray for someone 5'3". I didn't pray for someone who wears a size 7 shoe. I didn't pray for those things. I was older. I prayed for 3 things. Brother Dishman remembered one of them. I thought that was interesting. He hears so many things. But one of the things I prayed for, Lord, if you would have me to be married, I want her life and my life to complement each other in my walk with you. And that's what I desired. And that's what I want. That people could look and they're not going to say, oh, Danny and Rhonda. But God will give you the right someone to love if you depend on him. That's what I want someone to gather. There have been people who've been married many, many years. And I don't mean this ugly. I'm just being perception. And this is what I perceive. I have no desire to emulate their relationship. They've been married a lot longer than I have. But I look and watch. I ain't got no desire. I'm not being ugly. I'm not going to name names. That's terrible. But I just don't want it. What works for one may not work for another. I don't force first of all, I don't force anything on anybody. That's not my nature. You force feed a baby, what's it end up doing? I mean, what's the product of force feeding? Regurgitation. A big mess thrown back in your face. And that's often what happens when something is shoved at somebody. But what works for one may not work for other. There are people with whom I would rather not have. I'd rather not even discuss the concept of marriage and what it means to have a wife. I am a different person than them. Rhonda Ray and I are a different couple. I don't always have an appreciation for how they even interact and treat their spouse. No judgment. I'm not being ugly. I'm just saying, that's my perception. That's the reality I take from them. I am not interested in emulating that. But it doesn't mean that my way is the way, does it? I don't live in that delusion. That's arrogant. That's a bad self-perception. But what if I took that attitude? I would be like the man in our image, perceiving myself as this great strength of example, but maybe, just maybe, I got a lot to learn myself before I expect others to look at me as the prime example. Maybe I still got some learning to do. We are all always going to be learning, growing, and changing. And there are things about us that develop and evolve over time. I'm a very different 46-year-old than I was 24-year-old. And thank God. All right? Things change over time. If I don't grow and learn, then I could be just like the man in the picture. I think I'm in my prime. But all I'm in need of is I need to humble myself and get a better understanding of how God and others really see me. But this I know, God is faithful. He'll show me if I'm honest with myself before him. He will show me. So my prayer is, may the Lord help me to be honest before him. I do not want a disconnect between perception and reality.
Amen. It's good. Good lesson this morning. Very good. I was thinking, one thought come to me when Brother Danny was bringing that, how people perceive us a lot of times when you get your job review at work. I was thinking of that. Used to, we just did it every year or whatever, one review or whatever. Now we have to do it as we go along, and it kind of lets people see where they're at and what they need to improve on and things like that. But it ain't always they're happy with what they see because they're not perceiving it the way you are. They're letting stuff slip that they shouldn't, and first one thing and another. But if you own it, there's even a thing on there in the comments, and it talks about owning. This person owns that they need to do this or that, things like that. But admitting it and taking care of it will go a long ways. That's good lesson. We'll take a little bit of a break, and then we'll move on with the service shortly.